200 people roared with laughter under the crystal lights, while my father stood center stage, using my life as his favorite joke. He called me uneducated and worthless, a little error in the pedigree best hidden by applause. I simply raised my champagne, smiled, and delivered a sentence that silenced the room. Because none of them knew that the only thing keeping his precious empire from crumbling was the very daughter he just disowned. My name is Brianna Schneider, and I sat at table 19, the one closest to the swinging kitchen doors, watching the heat rise off the prime rib and the sweat bead on my father's forehead. The air in the Crestview Country Hall smelled of expensive cologne, roasted meat, and the specific, desperate ambition that clings to New Jersey social climbers. 200 people filled the ballroom. They were a curated collection of local power players, including city council members who needed campaign donations, bankers who needed reassurance, and lawyers who smelled blood in the water. This was the stage my father, Gavin Schneider, had spent 40 years building for himself. He stood at the podium, gripping the wood with hands that had not done a day of manual labor in 3 decades. He looked every inch the patriarch of the Arbor Cold Distribution Group. His tuxedo was tailored to hide the thickening of his waist. His hair was silvered to perfection, and his smile was a weapon he kept sheathed until he needed to cut someone. I took a sip of lukewarm water. The waiter had forgotten to refill my wine glass 3 courses ago, which was fitting. At table 19, you were not a guest of honor. You were an obligation. I was an afterthought in a room full of headlines. Gavin was halfway through his speech. It was a performance I had memorized because he had been rehearsing it in front of the bathroom mirror since I was 6 years old. He spoke of legacy. He spoke of grit. He spoke of the American dream as if he had invented it personally. "We built this company from the ground up," he said, his voice dropping an octave to simulate humility. "We faced storms that would have sunk lesser ships, but we had vision. We had strength." The crowd murmured their approval. They clapped at the right pauses. They laughed at the rehearsed jokes. It was theater. I scanned the room. I saw the faces of men who had denied me loans 10 years ago. I saw the women who had whispered about my mother's death behind manicured hands. They were all looking at Gavin with rapt attention, mesmerized by the projection of success. Then, the narrative pivot arrived. This was the part where a retiring CEO usually thanked his family. I watched Marla, my stepmother, sitting at the head table. She was radiant in emerald silk, her smile fixed in place like it had been lacquered on. Next to her was empty space where Trent, my stepbrother, should have been, but he was likely at the bar or in the bathroom, nursing the entitlement that had been fed to him since he was 12. And then there was me. Gavin paused. He took a sip of water. He scanned the room, his eyes skipping over the front tables, over the partners and the investors, until they landed on the back corner near the kitchen. The spotlight operator, sensing the cue, swung the heavy beam of light across the room. It cut through the darkness and landed squarely on me. I did not flinch. I had expected this. "And of course," Gavin said into the microphone, his voice booming, "we all have our burdens to bear. We all have those little jagged edges in the family portrait that we just cannot smooth out." The room went quiet. The tension was delicious to him. He loved making them uncomfortable before he relieved them with a punchline. "My daughter, Brianna, is here tonight," he continued, gesturing vaguely with his glass. "You know, I offered to pay for her to get an MBA like her brother. I offered to bring her into the fold, but some people just are not built for the high altitude of the boardroom." He chuckled. It was a dark, wet sound. "She prefers the simple life, uneducated, a bit aimless, but we love her anyway. Do we not? Even if she is useless to the bottom line." The punchline landed. A ripple of laughter went through the room. It started nervously, then grew as the guests realized they were permitted to laugh. They thought it was a roast. They thought it was that self-deprecating aristocratic humor where the powerful mock their own to show how secure they are. They looked at me, the woman in the plain black dress at the bad table, and they saw exactly what Gavin wanted them to see. A failure. A footnote. A charity case allowed into the castle for one night. I felt the heat rise in my neck, but I did not look down. I did not cry. I did not throw my napkin on the table. Instead, I picked up my empty wine glass. The laughter died down as I stood up. The scrape of my chair against the hardwood floor was loud in the sudden silence. The spotlight was still on me, blinding and hot. I could feel 200 pairs of eyes assessing my posture, my dress, my worth. I raised the empty glass toward the podium. My hand was steady. I locked eyes with my father across the expanse of white tablecloths and crystal centerpieces. He looked amused. He was waiting for me to sit back down, to accept the role of the sheepish, embarrassed daughter. "Congratulations, Gavin," I said. My voice was not amplified, but the room was so quiet that it carried to the high ceiling. "Thank you for the clarification." I paused. I let the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable, until the amusement drained from Gavin's face and was replaced by a flicker of confusion. "This is the last time you will ever see me," I said. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, delivered with the flat neutrality of a weather report. I placed the glass gently on the table. It made a soft clinking sound. Then I turned and walked toward the exit. The only sound in the Crestview Country Hall was the rhythmic click of my heels on the parquet floor. Click, click, click. It sounded like a gavel striking a sounding block. Over and over again, I kept my head high. I did not look at the faces blurring past me. I did not look at the bankers who were suddenly studying their shoes, or the councilmen who were pretending to adjust their cufflinks. I pushed open the heavy double doors and stepped out of the ballroom. The air in the corridor was cooler, stripped of the body heat and the suffocating scent of roasted meat. I kept walking. I grabbed my coat from the cloakroom attendant, a young girl who looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, as if I had just committed a murder. In a way, I supposed I had. I had just killed the version of Brianna Schneider they all knew. I pushed through the main entrance doors and stepped out into the New Jersey night. The air was crisp, biting at my bare arms. The valet was halfway across the lot. But I did not wait for him. I started walking toward my car. A sensible sedan parked in the overflow lot, because the VIP spots were reserved for people who mattered. Brianna. The voice was sharp, cutting through the night air. I did not stop, but I heard the rapid clicking of heels behind me, faster and more erratic than mine. Marla. She caught up to me near the fountain, her hand clamping onto my forearm with surprising strength. Her nails dug into my skin. I stopped and looked down at her hand, then up at her face. Under the harsh halogen streetlights, Marla looked less like a queen and more like a desperate stage manager. Her lipstick was bleeding slightly into the fine lines around her mouth. "What the hell was that?" she hissed. Her voice was sweet, pitched high, but her eyes were absolute ice. "You act like a petulant child." He was making a joke. "Brianna, a joke. You are ruining the family honor." I pulled my arm away. The physical contact made my skin crawl. "There is no honor here." "Marla," I said, "do not you dare walk away from me," she snapped. "Do you have any idea who is in that room? The mayor is in that room. The board of directors is in that room. You are going to turn around. You are going to march back in there, and you are going to laugh. You are going to apologize to your father and tell everyone you had too much to drink." I looked at her, really looked at her. For 12 years, I had let this woman dictate the temperature of my life. I had let her passive-aggressive comments and her exclusionary tactics push me into the shadows. I had let her convince me that I was furniture. "No," I said. The word hung in the air between us. Marla blinked. She looked as if I had slapped her. I had never said that word to her before. Not once. Then the heavy doors banged open again. Brianna Gavin strode toward us. He was flushed, his tie slightly askew. He did not look like the benevolent patriarch anymore. He looked like a man whose property had just decided to walk off the lot. "Get back inside," he barked. He did not ask. He commanded. It was the voice he used on secretaries and warehouse foremen. "You are making a scene. You are embarrassing me." I turned to face him. He loomed over me, using his height as intimidation, a trick that had worked when I was 10. It did not work when I was 32. You embarrassed yourself. Gavin, I said calmly, I just provided the exit music. You ungrateful little brat. He spat. The mask was fully off now. The charm he had displayed on the podium was gone, replaced by the ugly, small resentment that lived in his core. I pay for your apartment. I pay for your car. I put food in your mouth for 20 years. And this is how you repay me. By throwing a tantrum because I told the truth, you are worthless without me. You have nothing. I almost smiled. The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. He thought he paid for my apartment. He thought he knew where my money came from. He thought the small allowance he had sent through the trust, the one he controlled, was my lifeline. He had no idea that I had not touched a cent of his money in 7 years. I am done, Gavin. I said, I am done being the punchline. You are done when I say you are done, he shouted. He stepped closer, his finger jabbing toward my face. If you leave now, do not bother coming back. I will cut you off. I will write you out of the will. I will make sure you starve. Do you hear me? You will be nothing. I looked at him, etching this moment into my memory. I wanted to remember exactly how he looked right now. I wanted to remember the vein throbbing in his temple. I wanted to remember the smell of scotch on his breath. I wanted to remember the absolute certainty in his eyes that he owned me. I stepped back. Goodbye, Dad, I said. I turned and walked to my car. Coward, he screamed after me. Walk away. That is all you know how to do. Run away like a loser. I got into my car and locked the doors. The sound of his shouting was muffled instantly, reduced to a pantomime of rage in the rearview mirror. I watched him standing there under the streetlights, flailing his arms, with Marla trying to calm him down, trying to pull him back into the illusion they had created. I put the key in the ignition, but I did not turn it. My hands were shaking, not from fear, from adrenaline, from the sheer, massive release of energy that comes from severing a limb to save the body. I took a deep breath. 1, 2, 3. I reached for my purse and pulled out my phone. The screen lit up the dark interior of the car. There was a text message waiting for me. It was from Noah Klein, my chief financial officer. I swiped the screen to unlock it. The light was harsh on my eyes. The message was short. It was professional. And it was the most beautiful thing I had read all night. From Noah Klein. Subject Arbor, cold contract renewal, Brianna. Their legal team just sent over the formal request for the contract renewal. They are asking for a 3-year extension on the cold chain audit and logistics certification. They are desperate. They missed the deadline by 2 weeks and they know it. If you do not sign this, their compliance rating drops below federal standards in 30 days. Their operations will choke. They will not be able to move a single truck across state lines. I stared at the words. Their operations will choke. I looked up at the rearview mirror one last time. Gavin was still there, straightening his jacket, preparing to go back inside and charm the room, preparing to tell them that his daughter was just emotional, just a silly girl who did not understand the real world. He had no idea that the uneducated, worthless girl he had just mocked was the owner of Citrine Chain Audits. He had no idea that Citrine Chain Audits was the only certified third-party auditor that his biggest clients accepted. He had no idea that without my signature, his frozen empire would begin to melt in exactly 30 days. I looked back down at the phone. My thumb hovered over the screen. I typed a reply. To Noah Klein. Do not sign it. Let it sit on the desk. I want them to sweat. I hit send. I started the engine. The car purred to life. I put it in drive and pulled out of the lot, leaving the Crestview Country Hall and the 200 laughing guests behind me. The highway stretched out ahead, empty and dark. Let the game begin. The silence in my car as I drove away from the country club was heavy, but it was not new. It was a familiar weight, a ghost that had been riding in the passenger seat of my life for 12 years. That silence did not start tonight. It started in a beautiful, sprawling house in Maple Crest, New Jersey, right after the last of the funeral flowers for my mother had wilted. I was 12 when my mother died. Her death was the event that turned our home from a living space into a museum. The furniture was still expensive. The floors were still polished to a high sheen, and the air conditioner still hummed at a perfect 70 degrees, but the warmth had evaporated. For 2 years, it was just my father and me, drifting past each other in hallways like two satellites on different orbits. He buried himself in the arbor-cold office, and I buried myself in books, trying to be quiet enough to not remind him of what he had lost. Then came Marla. She did not arrive like a villain in a storybook. She arrived with casseroles, soft touches, and a son named Trent, who was 4 years older than me. Marla was beautiful in a way that required maintenance, hair always done, nails always perfect, voice always pitched at a level that suggested supreme patience. When she moved in, the house suddenly had a center of gravity again. But I was not in the orbit. The new solar system revolved entirely around Gavin, Marla, and Trent. I was 16 when I realized I had become furniture. It is a strange sensation to be turned into an inanimate object. It does not happen with violence. There were no beatings. There were no screaming matches where they told me I was unwanted. That would have been easier to handle because rage implies passion. Rage implies that you matter enough to be hated. Instead, I was erased through politeness. I remember dinners where the conversation would flow over my head like water over a smooth stone. Gavin would ask Trent about his lacrosse practice, about his mediocre grades, about his social life. Trent would answer with the unearned confidence of a boy who has never been told no. Marla would hang on his every word, adding commentary, laughing at jokes that were not funny. When I tried to speak, the air would change. I would mention a history project I was proud of, or a book I was reading, and there would be a beat of silence. "That is nice, Brianna," Marla would say, her eyes already drifting back to Trent. "Gavin, did you hear what Trent said about the coach?" And just like that, I was gone. I was a lamp in the corner, useful for background texture, but not something you spoke to. Trent was the investment. He was the future. He was the heir apparent to the arbor-cold throne, even though his grades were average and his work ethic was non-existent. He was given tutors, camps, cars, and allowances that rivaled the salaries of the people working in my father's warehouse. I was the expense. I was the obligation. The only person who saw me who actually looked at me and saw a human being with a pulse and a mind was my grandmother, Evelyn Schneider. She was Gavin's mother, but she looked at him with a critical eye that terrified him. She lived in an assisted living facility 40 minutes away, a place that smelled of lavender and old paper. Every Sunday, she would call the house phone. If Marla answered, the conversation would be sugary and short. If I answered, Evelyn would stay on the line for an hour. "Tell me what you're reading," she would demand. Her voice was raspy from years of smoking before she quit, but it was strong. "Do not tell me what you did. Tell me what you are thinking." She was the only one who asked me what I wanted to be. When I told her I wanted to understand how businesses worked, how things moved from point A to point B, she did not laugh. She asked me questions about logistics. She treated my 19-year-old brain with more respect than my father treated his entire board of directors. But Sunday calls could not save me from the reality of the rest of the week. The breaking point, the moment that truly defined the last decade of my life, happened when I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore in college, studying business administration at a state university. I was working 20 hours a week at a coffee shop to pay for my own books and gas, trying to minimize the burden so my father would have no reason to complain. I had a 3.9 grade point average. I was on the dean's list. I was building a foundation, brick by brick, hoping that if I built it high enough, my father would finally look up and see me. It was a Tuesday evening when I was summoned home. "We need to have a family meeting," Gavin had said over the phone. When I arrived, the dynamic in the living room was staged like a corporate intervention. Gavin sat in his leather armchair, the one no one else was allowed to sit in. Marla was perched on the arm of his chair, her hand resting possessively on his shoulder. Trent was sprawled on the sofa, looking bored, scrolling through his phone. There was a single wooden chair placed opposite them. It was not part of the living room set. It had been brought in from the dining room. "Sit down. Brianna," Gavin said. I sat. My hands were sweating. I racked my brain, trying to think of what I had done wrong. Had I forgotten a birthday? Had I dented the car? We have been reviewing the family finances. Gavin started. He did not look at me. He looked at a spot on the wall just above my head. And we have to make some strategic adjustments. He used corporate speak for family matters. It was his way of detaching himself from the emotional impact of his decisions. Trent has been accepted into the executive MBA program at a very prestigious private university. Marla said, beaming. She squeezed Gavin's shoulder. It is a wonderful opportunity. It is going to secure his future at Arbor Cold. I nodded. That is great, I said, forcing a smile. Congratulations. Trent barely looked up. Thanks. However, Gavin continued, his voice dropping to that serious, burden-carrying tone he loved to use. The tuition is substantial, and with the market being volatile right now, and the renovations we are doing on the summer house, well, the liquidity is tight. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. I knew where this was going, but I prayed I was wrong. We have to prioritize, Gavin said. We have to look at the return on investment. Trent is going to take over the company one day. His education is a business expense. It is necessary. He paused. We cannot support 2 tuitions right now. Brianna, one house cannot feed 2 dreams. The room went silent. I stared at him. I go to a state school, I said, my voice trembling slightly. My tuition is a fraction of his. I am working part-time. I am paying for my own books. I know, Gavin said, waving his hand dismissively as if I were a fly buzzing around his head. But it is still a drain. Room and board. Insurance? The car, it adds up. We need to cut costs. Cut costs. I was a line item. I was a redundancy. So what are you saying? I asked. We are stopping your tuition support effective next semester, he said. I felt the blood drain from my face. I have 1 year left. Dad, 1 year. I am on the dean's list. You can take a break, he said, finally looking at me. His eyes were flat, devoid of empathy. Get a full-time job. Save up. Finish later. It is not a race. Brianna. Besides, let us be honest. You are not exactly academic material. You struggle. I stared at him. I had a higher GPA than Trent ever had in his life. I did not struggle. I thrived. But he did not know that because he never looked at my report cards. He only looked at Trent's, which Marla framed and hung on the wall even when they were mediocre. Marla leaned forward then. Her voice was soft, like syrup laced with arsenic. Oh, honey, do not look so devastated, she said. She tilted her head, giving me a look of pity that felt like a slap. Honestly, a girl like you do not need a business degree to be happy. You are pretty enough. If you focus on your social skills, maybe lose 5 pounds. You will find a nice husband who can take care of you. That is the most important career for a woman, is it not? Marrying the right person. I looked at Trent. He was smirking. He found this funny. He was watching his sister being told she was worthless, and he was amused. I looked at my father. He was already checking his watch, signaling that the meeting was over. The decision had been made. The furniture was being put in storage to make room for the trophy. I stood up. I did not scream. I did not flip the table. I realized in that moment that screaming would be a waste of energy. They did not speak my language. They spoke the language of assets and liabilities, and they had just decided I was a liability. Okay, I said. Gavin looked surprised. He had expected tears. He had expected begging. He liked it when people begged him. It made him feel like a god. Okay, he asked. I understand. I said, I will pack my things. I walked out of the living room, up the stairs, and into the room that had been mine since I was a baby. I did not pack everything. I packed 1 suitcase. I took the few clothes that were practical. I took my laptop. I took the photo of my mother from the nightstand. I left the dresses Marla had bought me. I left the jewelry Gavin had given me on birthdays as generic obligations. I left the life they had allowed me to borrow. I walked back down the stairs 30 minutes later. They were already watching television. They had moved on. The problem of Brianna had been solved. I walked out the front door into the cool night air. My car, an old hatchback that was technically mine, bought with money from my mother's small life insurance policy, was parked in the driveway. I was reaching for the door handle when I heard a car pull up. It was a town car service. The back window rolled down. It was Grandma Evelyn. She had come for Sunday dinner a day early. Or maybe she had sensed something in the water. She looked at my suitcase, then she looked at my face. She did not ask what happened. She knew. She had watched Gavin grow up. She knew exactly what kind of man he was. She motioned for me to come closer. I walked over to the window. I was fighting back tears now. Not because of what my father had done, but because seeing her broke the dam I had built to hold the pain in. "Where are you going?" she asked. "Baltimore," I said. I did not know why I said Baltimore. It was just the first city that came to my mind that was far enough away to be real, but close enough to drive to on a tank of gas. I'm going to figure it out. She reached out her hand. Her skin was paper thin, spotted with age, but her grip was iron. She pulled me down so my ear was close to her lips. "Listen to me, Brianna," she whispered. The smell of lavender and peppermint was strong. "Do not let them see you bleed. Never let them see you bleed." She pressed something into my hand. It was a wad of cash. It was not a fortune. Maybe a few $100s she kept in her purse, but it felt heavy. "And if you must disappear," she said, her voice dropping to a fierce hiss, "do not just run away. Disappear with a plan. Build something they cannot take, and when you come back, make sure you own the ground they are standing on." I squeezed her hand. It was the only physical affection I had received in that house for years. "I promise," I whispered. I got into my car. I put the cash in the passenger seat. I looked at the house one last time, the glowing windows, the silhouette of my father moving past the curtains, oblivious to the fact that he had just severed the only honest connection he had in this world. I backed out of the driveway. I did not look back. I drove south, toward the highway, toward Baltimore, toward the bottom of the world. I was 20 years old. I was uneducated. I was worthless in their eyes. But as the miles put distance between me and Maple Crest, I felt a strange, cold clarity settling in my chest. I was no longer their furniture. I was no longer their expense. I was a ghost. And as Grandma Evelyn had said, I was a ghost with a plan. Baltimore was not a welcome mat. It was a cold shower. I arrived with $2,400 in cash, a suitcase full of clothes that were too nice for the life I was about to lead, and a car that rattled every time I went over 40 miles per hour. I found a studio apartment in a neighborhood that real estate agents politely described as up and coming, which really meant it was loud, dirty, and ignored by the city services. The rent was $800 a month. That bought me 400 square feet. A radiator that hissed like an angry cat, and walls so thin I could hear my neighbor's television schedule better than my own thoughts. Every night at 2 a.m, an ambulance would scream down the street, its siren bouncing off the brick row houses. The first week, I woke up in a panic every time, heart hammering, thinking there was an emergency. By the 4th week, I did not even open my eyes. I learned to sleep through the noise just like I had learned to live through my father's dismissal. It was all just background static. It was just the sound of a world that did not care if you were comfortable. I needed a job, not a career. A job. I walked into the office of Harbor Line Compliance Services on a Tuesday morning. It was a small, cramped operation located above a dry cleaner. The air smelled of chemical steam and stale coffee. They handled the unsexy, tedious paperwork that trucking companies and warehouses hated doing: safety logs, driver hour audits, and regulatory filings. Frank Delaney sat behind a metal desk that looked like it had survived a war. He was a man in his 60s with skin like leather and a permanent scowl etched into his forehead. He was smoking a cigarette, even though there was a no smoking sign taped to the wall directly behind his head. "I do not have a degree," I told him. I did not sit down. I stood in front of his desk, holding my resume, which looked pathetic now that I had stripped the Schneider name off of it. I had 2 years of college credits and a lot of generic volunteer work. Frank looked at the paper. He did not look at me. He took a drag of his cigarette and exhaled a plume of blue smoke. "Can you read?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Can you type without looking at your fingers?" "Yes." "Can you show up at 8 in the morning and stay until the work is done, even if the work is boring enough to make you want to gouge your eyes out?" I looked at the stacks of filing boxes behind him. They were overflowing with manifests and driver logs. It looked like a graveyard of paper. I have nowhere else to be. "Frank," I said. He looked up then. He studied my face, looking for the entitlement he usually saw in kids my age. He did not find it. He crushed the cigarette out in an overflowing ashtray. $12 an hour. He grunted. "No benefits for 90 days. If you are late twice, you are fired. Start on that pile in the corner." That was my introduction to the real world. For the next 2 years, I ceased to be a person. I became a machine. My day started at 6 in the morning. I would drink black coffee that tasted like battery acid and drive to the office. I spent 10 hours a day staring at spreadsheets, cross-referencing driver logs against GPS data, looking for violations. It was mind-numbing work. It was searching for needles in haystacks made of numbers. But something strange happened. I realized I was good at it. My father had called me uneducated. He had called me slow, but in the quiet chaos of Harbor Line, I discovered that my brain had a specific texture. I could see patterns where other people just saw noise. I could look at a column of shipping times and temperature readings and instinctively know where the lie was. Frank Delaney was not a mentor in the traditional sense. He did not offer praise. He offered grunts of affirmation. "You caught that variance on the Milwaukee route," he said to me one afternoon, tossing a file onto my desk. "Good eye. Most people miss the 30-minute gap." That was the equivalent of a standing ovation from Frank. He told me once, while we were eating cold sandwiches at our desks, "You know why these big companies fail?" "Brianna." "No," I said. "Because they look at the horizon," he said, chewing slowly. "They are always looking at the big picture. They forget that the road is made of gravel. You miss a piece of gravel. You pop a tire. You pop a tire. You miss a delivery. You miss a delivery. You lose a contract. The devil is not in the details. The devil is the details." That stuck with me. The devil is the details. I started using my nights. I did not go out. I did not make friends. I did not date. I had no money for it, and I had no patience for the small talk. I signed up for online courses. I finished my bachelor's degree in business operations from a state university online program. I did it 1 credit at a time, paying cash as I went, so I would not have any debt. I studied at night, the blue light of my laptop illuminating the peeling paint on my apartment walls. When I finished the degree, I did not walk across a stage. I did not buy a cap and gown. I did not post a picture on social media. I just downloaded the PDF of the diploma, saved it to a hard drive, and went to sleep. It was not a trophy. It was a tool. But I did not stop there. I realized that a general degree was not enough. I needed a weapon. I started pursuing certifications that most people found incredibly dull. I became a certified 6 Sigma green belt, then a black belt. I took courses on ISO 9001 standards. I studied the Food Safety Modernization Act until I could recite the regulations on temperature controls backward. I became obsessed with the cold chain, the logistics of moving frozen and refrigerated goods. It was the most volatile part of the industry. If a truck's refrigeration unit failed for 2 hours, $100,000 of inventory could spoil. I saw how sloppy the industry was. I saw how many companies, including companies like Arbor Cold, cut corners. They fudged the numbers. They guessed. I started recording everything. At Harbor Line, I stopped asking questions and started building a database. I created my own system for tracking compliance failures. I noted which trucking lines were reliable and which ones were gambling with food safety. I stopped trying to explain myself to people. In my old life, I was always apologizing. I am sorry I'm not smart enough. I am sorry I am in the way. In Baltimore, I learned that explanations are for the weak. Data is for the strong. If Frank questioned a report I generated, I did not argue. I just slid the raw data across the desk. Here are the timestamps, I would say. He would look at it, grunt, and nod. Discipline became my religion. I ate the same thing for breakfast every day. I wore simple, functional clothes. I saved every penny that did not go to rent or tuition. By the time I was 24, I had saved $15,000. It felt like a fortune. It was freedom money. One evening, I stayed late at Harbor Line. Frank was already gone. The office was dark, lit only by the streetlights outside. I was looking at a compliance audit for a pharmaceutical company. They had lost 3 shipments of insulin due to temperature excursions, instances where the temperature went out of the safe range. Their current auditor had marked it as unavoidable equipment failure. I looked at the data. It was not equipment failure. It was human error. The drivers were turning off the cooling units to save fuel during rest stops. I saw it clearly in the fuel logs versus the temperature logs. I realized then that I was working for the wrong side of the table. Harbor Line fixed paperwork. I did not want to fix paperwork. I wanted to fix the chain. I typed up my resignation letter that night. When I gave it to Frank the next morning, he did not get angry. He looked at the letter. Then he looked at me. "You are going out on your own, aren't you?" he asked. "Yes," I said. He nodded slowly. "You are ready. You are too sharp for this room. Kid, just remember one thing." "What is that?" "Do not let them charm you," he said. "The suits. They will try to charm you or scare you. You look at the numbers. The numbers do not lie. People lie." I left Harbor Line on a Friday. On Monday morning, I filed the paperwork for Citrine Chain Audits, LLC. I chose the name Citrine because I had read somewhere that the stone was supposed to bring clarity and wealth. I did not care about the superstition, but I liked the word clarity. That was what I was selling. I rented a tiny office space in an industrial park near the port. It was smaller than my apartment. It had 1 desk, 1 chair, and a server rack I built myself to handle the data processing. I was the CEO, the janitor, the sales team, and the auditor. I started cold calling. I did not call the CEOs. I called the quality assurance managers. I called the people who got fired when things went wrong. "I am not selling you insurance," I told them. "I am selling you sleep. I will find the holes in your cold chain before the FDA does." It was slow at first. I ate a lot of rice and beans. I patched my shoes with super glue, but I got 1 client, then 2. They saw my reports. They saw the detail. They saw that I caught things their expensive legacy auditors missed. Word spread. In the unglamorous world of logistics, competence is the only currency that matters. 4 years flew by in a blur of caffeine and spreadsheets. Citrine grew. I hired my first employee, then my second. I moved into a slightly larger office. I was making real money now, but I put every cent back into the company. I upgraded our software. I hired Noah Klein, a brilliant forensic accountant who had been burned by corporate politics and wanted a clean fight. I was building a fortress. On the 4-year anniversary of leaving home the day I officially signed the lease on a real commercial space for Citrine, a package arrived at my office. It was a small, brown padded envelope. There was no return address. The postmark was from New Jersey. My heart skipped a beat. I sat at my new glass desk, the smell of fresh carpet and success around me, and stared at the package. I opened it carefully. Inside was a small, leather-bound notebook. It was old. The leather was cracked. I opened it and saw pages filled with handwriting I recognized instantly. It was Grandma Evelyn's handwriting. It was a ledger of her own notes on investments, on people, on observations she had made over the years. Tucked into the front cover was a single index card. It was her handwriting, shaky but firm. "I watch you from the quiet seats. I see the filings. I see the name. Citrine. Good name." I felt a lump in my throat. She had been watching. She had been tracking me, probably through public records, checking the business registries. She knew I had not just disappeared. She knew I was building. I turned the card over. There was one last line: do not call. Do not write. They are not ready to know you exist. You just build. Build it so high they have to crane their necks to see you. I ran my thumb over the ink. I put the card in my top drawer and locked it. I picked up the phone and dialed Noah's extension. Noah, I said. My voice was steady. It was the voice of a woman who owned her own ground. Get the team ready. I want to go after the big fish. Pull the public compliance records for the top 5 distributors on the East Coast. I paused. Start with Arbor Cold, I said. I hung up. I looked out the window at the Baltimore skyline. It was not pretty, but it was solid. It was real. I was done surviving. It was time to start hunting. The funeral of Evelyn Schneider took place on a gray, weeping Tuesday in November. I was 31 years old. I drove up from Baltimore in a rental car because my own vehicle, while reliable, still bore the bumper stickers of a scrappy startup, and I did not want to give my family anything to read. I wore a charcoal suit that cost more than my first car, tailored to make me look like armor. I arrived late on purpose. The service was held at the old stone chapel in Maple Crest, where the Schneiders had been burying their dead for 3 generations. The pews were packed. My grandmother was a woman who commanded respect, not because she was warm, but because she was inevitable. She was a force of nature that everyone assumed would outlast the mountains. I slipped into the very last row, sitting next to a deaf elderly man who smelled of mothballs. Far ahead, in the front row, I saw the back of my father's head. His hair was perfectly silver, his shoulders shaking just enough to suggest grief without losing composure. Marla was next to him, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Trent was there too, checking his watch. I did not cry. I had done my grieving on the drive up, screaming along with the radio until my throat felt like sandpaper. Sitting there, watching the priest drone on about a woman he clearly did not know. I felt like a spy in enemy territory. I was a Schneider by blood, but a stranger by decree. When the service ended, I did not go to the burial. I did not go to the wake at the house, my old house. I slipped out the side door while the organist was still playing the exit hymn. I walked through the rain to my rental car, got in, and drove back to Baltimore. I did not speak to a single soul. I thought that was the end of it. I thought Evelyn was gone, and my last tether to that family had snapped. I was wrong. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize, with a New York area code. Ms. Schneider, a woman's voice asked. It was a sharp, professional voice, the kind that bills by the minute. Speaking, I said, cradling the phone against my shoulder as I reviewed a temperature log for a seafood distributor. My name is Jillian Hart. I am a senior partner at Hart & Weller Trust Counsel. I am calling regarding the estate of Evelyn Schneider. I paused. My father is handling the estate. I said, you should call his office. I am not calling for your father. Jillian said. Her tone dropped a degree. Becoming more serious, I am calling for you. We need to meet. In person. Alone. My stomach did a slow roll. Why? Because your grandmother left specific instructions. Jillian said. And because what I have to tell you cannot be discussed over the phone. Can you be in Manhattan tomorrow at 10 in the morning? I canceled my meetings. I told Noah to handle the audit for the frozen yogurt client. I took the train to New York the next morning. The offices of Hart & Weller were on the 45th floor of a Glass Needle in Midtown. It was the kind of law firm that did not advertise because their clients were the kind of people who owned islands. The reception area was quiet, smelling of leather and old money. Jillian Hart came out to meet me herself. She was a woman in her 50s with steel gray hair cut in a sharp bob and glasses that looked like they could cut glass. She shook my hand firmly. Thank you for coming, she said. She led me into a corner office that overlooked the city. She closed the door and locked it. It was a small gesture, but it made the air in the room suddenly feel heavy. She sat behind her desk and placed a thick file folder in front of her. She did not open it immediately. She looked at me, studying my face. You look like her, she said softly. Around the eyes. I stayed silent. I was used to people analyzing me. Evelyn was my client for 20 years, Jillian said. She was also my friend. She was a very observant woman. Brianna. She saw things other people missed. She opened the file, 12 years ago, shortly after you left home. Evelyn came to me. She was angry. I had never seen her that angry. She told me about a family meeting. She told me about a tuition fund that was misappropriated. I felt the air leave my lungs. She knew. I knew she suspected, but I did not know she knew the details. She told me that her son, your father, had made a choice. Jillian continued. He chose to invest in one child at the expense of the other. She called it a bad trade. Jillian pulled a document from the file. So, she created a correction mechanism. What is that? I asked. Pointing to the document, this, Jillian said, is the Evelyn Schneider Irrevocable Trust. It was established 11 years ago. The sole beneficiary is you. I stared at the paper. There were strict confidentiality clauses, Jillian explained. Your father does not know this trust exists. Marla does not know, if they knew. They would have tried to litigate it while Evelyn was alive, claiming she was senile or coerced. But Evelyn was smart. She kept it entirely separate from the main estate. How much is it? I asked. I was not greedy, but I was practical. Citrine was growing, but we were cash poor. We needed new servers. We needed to hire more auditors. The liquid assets, cash and stocks total roughly $450,000, Jillian said. I blinked. That was life-changing money for my business. That was the capital injection I had been desperate for. But, Jillian said, raising a finger, that is not the main asset. She pulled another document from the file. This one looked like a deed. Evelyn was a traditionalist. Jillian said, she did not trust the stock market completely. She believed in land. She believed in brick and mortar. Specifically, she believed in the unglamorous, necessary parts of the economy. She slid the deed toward me. The trust owns a 40% equity stake in a private entity called Iron Creek Industrial Holdings. Jillian said, I frowned. I had never heard of it. What is Iron Creek? It is a boutique real estate holding company, Jillian said. They specialize in acquiring and managing specialized industrial properties. Specifically, temperature-controlled warehousing. My heart started to hammer against my ribs. Cold storage. My grandmother had invested in cold storage. Why, I asked. She reached into the file again and pulled out a smaller envelope. It was cream-colored stationery. On the front, in shaky blue ink, was written, for Brianna. She wanted to tell you that herself. Jillian said. I took the envelope. My hands were shaking. I opened it carefully. Trying not to tear the paper, the letter was short. My dearest Brianna, I saw you leave that night. I saw you walk out with your head high, even though your heart was breaking. I saw my son choose a shiny object over a solid foundation. He has always been a fool for things that glitter. He cut your future to pay for Trent's. I cannot undo that. But I can make sure that when you are ready, you have the ground beneath your feet to stand taller than all of them. I put my money where the world is going, not where it has been. People will always need to eat. Food will always need to be cold. I bought into this company because I knew you would understand the value of things that work in the dark. Use this, build your castle. But remember my rule. Do not be cruel. You do not need to be cruel. Just tell the truth. The truth knows how to hurt far more than any insult. I am proud of you. I have always been proud of you. Grandma. I put the letter down. I had to close my eyes for a moment to stop the tears from falling. For a decade, I had convinced myself I was alone. I was not alone. She had been there, moving pieces on the board, waiting for me to be strong enough to play the game. I looked up at Jillian. Does he know? I asked. Does my father know about Iron Creek number? Jillian said. He knows Iron Creek is a vendor. He knows them as a landlord. But he has no idea who the silent partners are. The structure of the trust is designed to be opaque. Your name does not appear on public records associated with Iron Creek. It is all held through the trust entity. I nodded slowly. The gears in my mind were turning. I was switching from granddaughter mode to CEO mode. So, I own 40% of a company that owns warehouses. I said, correct, Jillian said, and because of the way the operating agreement is written, the trust has veto power over major leasing decisions. I sat back in the leather chair. I have a plan for the cash. I said, I am going to reinvest it into my company. Citrine needs to scale. We need to be undeniable. Good, Jillian said. She looked pleased. And the stake in Iron Creek, I asked. Do I just collect dividends? You could, Jillian said. It generates a healthy passive income. But there is something else you should know. She leaned forward, her elbows on the desk, her expression tightening into a conspiratorial smile. Iron Creek has a portfolio of 12 properties across the tri-state area. She said, most are small, but there is one flagship property, a massive cold storage facility in Newark. She slid a photograph across the desk. It was an aerial shot of a sprawling warehouse complex with dozens of loading docks. I recognized it instantly. I had seen the address on invoices. I had seen the compliance reports for this facility. Jillian's voice was quiet, precise, and loaded with implication. This facility is currently leased to a single tenant on a long-term commercial lease. She said. She paused, letting the silence fill the room. That tenant, Brianna, is the Arbor Cold Distribution Group. I stared at the photo. My father's company, the company he claimed he built from the ground up, the company he said I was too stupid to be part of. He did not own his main distribution hub. He rented it, and he rented it from a company that was 40% owned by the daughter he had disowned. Jillian looked straight at me, her eyes gleaming behind her glasses. Your father is currently in negotiations to renew the lease for another 10 years, she said. He thinks he is negotiating with a faceless board of directors. He thinks it is just a matter of price per square foot. She tapped the photo with her manicured fingernail. He has no idea that the person who eventually has to sign off on that lease is you. I felt a chill run down my spine, but it was not from fear. It was the cold, hard rush of power. Real power. Not the loud, shouting power my father used, but the quiet, structural power that my grandmother had understood. I picked up the photo. I looked at the trucks lined up at the docks. I looked at the empire my father thought was his. He was a tenant in my house. He just did not know it yet. I looked up at Jillian. Do not tell him. I said, Of course not, she replied. Let him negotiate, I said. Let him think he is safe. Let him feel secure. I put the photo back in the file. I am not ready to pull the rug yet. I said, I want to build Citrine first. I want to be so big that when he finally finds out, he realizes he is surrounded. Jillian smiled. It was a genuine smile this time. Evelyn was right. She said, You really are her granddaughter. I stood up and shook her hand. Thank you. Jillian, keep the trust sealed. Reinvest the dividends into the Iron Creek Capital Improvement Fund. I want that warehouse to be state-of-the-art. Why, she asked. Because, I said, walking toward the door, I want to make sure the property value is high when I finally decide what to do with my tenant. I walked out of the law firm and into the bustling streets of Manhattan. The city was loud, chaotic, and indifferent, but for the first time in my life, I did not feel small. I hailed a taxi to Penn Station. As I sat in the back seat, watching the skyscrapers blur past, I touched the pocket of my jacket where I had tucked Evelyn's letter. The truth knows how to hurt. I was not going to be cruel. I was just going to be the landlord. And in business, the landlord always holds the keys. I took out my phone and called Noah. Noah, I said, I secured the funding. That is amazing. Brianna, he said. How much? Enough to double our staff, I said. And Noah. Yeah, add a new metric to our audit protocol. I said, I want us to start tracking lease vulnerabilities for our clients. I want to know who owns the buildings they operate in. Why, Noah asked. That is not usually part of a cold chain audit. It is now. I said, we need to know where the weak points are, because sooner or later, everyone has to pay the rent. I hung up the phone. The train ride back to Baltimore felt different. The scenery was the same industrial wastelands, graffiti-covered walls, gray skies, but I saw it differently now. I saw assets. I saw leverage. My father was playing checkers. He was moving pieces around, shouting, trying to capture attention. I was playing chess, and thanks to Grandma Evelyn, I had just promoted a pawn to a queen. I closed my eyes and slept the rest of the way home, dreaming of ice, steel, and the inevitable silence that comes after the checkmate. The growth of citrine chain audits did not look like a tech startup explosion. There were no ping-pong tables, no beanbag chairs, and no viral marketing campaigns. It looked like a military operation. We occupied the entire third floor of a renovated industrial building in South Baltimore. The walls were exposed brick, not for aesthetics, but because covering them cost money I preferred to spend on encryption and server redundancy. We had 18 full-time employees, forensic accountants, data analysts, and former logistics managers who had grown tired of being asked to look the other way. My office was in the back, behind frosted glass. There was no nameplate on the door. To the outside world, I was a ghost. I had learned the most valuable lesson of my childhood: visibility is a liability. In the Schneider house, being seen meant being judged, being measured, and usually being found wanting. So, when I built Citrine, I built it as a black box. I had no personal LinkedIn profile. I gave no interviews. I did not speak at industry conferences. When trade magazines called asking for a quote from the innovative founder behind the new standard in cold chain auditing, my executive assistant, a sharp-tongued woman named Elena, told them the founder was unavailable and prefers the work to speak for itself. It was not shyness. It was strategy. Our clients did not care who I was. They cared that when Citrine certified a shipment, the FDA stopped asking questions. We had become the gold standard for pharmaceutical companies moving vaccines and for high-end food distributors moving perishables. And inevitably, we had become the lifeline for the Arbor Cold Distribution Group. It had started 3 years ago. Arbor Cold had lost a major contract with a supermarket chain after a listeria outbreak was traced back to temperature abuse in one of their transit hubs. They were desperate to regain market trust. They needed an external auditor with a reputation for ruthlessness to certify their new protocols. They came to Citrine. I remember the day the request for proposal landed on Noah Klein's desk. He walked into my office, his face pale. "Brianna," he said, holding the tablet like it was a bomb. "We just got an RFP from Arbor Cold." I did not look up from my monitor. I was tracking a shipment of biosamples moving from Boston to Atlanta. "Treat it like any other lead." "Noah," I said. He stared at me. "Are you serious?" "It is your father's company. It is a potential client." I corrected. "Do they meet our revenue threshold?" "Yes." "Do they have a history of compliance issues that we can fix?" "Yes." "Then bid on it." I said, "Price it 20% higher than our standard rate. Call it a high-risk premium." We won the contract. For 3 years. My company had been auditing my father's company every week. I saw their raw data. I saw their fuel costs, their driver turnover rates, their spoilage reports. I knew more about the operational health of Arbor Cold than Gavin Schneider did. I knew that Trent, who was now ostensibly the VP of operations, had approved a vendor switch for truck maintenance that saved them 12% upfront, but increased breakdown incidents by 18%. I knew that Marla's consulting fee was billed to the marketing budget, even though she had not produced a single marketing campaign in 5 years. I saw the rot, and I sold them the paint to cover it up legally. Of course, we forced them to adhere to strict standards to get our seal of approval. In a way, I was the only reason their trucks were still on the road. I never attended the quarterly reviews. Noah handled those. He was the face of Citrine to Arbor Cold. To them, the owner was a reclusive investor, probably some tech billionaire in Silicon Valley who did not have time for meetings in New Jersey. That anonymity was my shield. Until the invitation arrived, it came via courier, not regular mail. A heavy cream envelope with gold foil lining. The board of directors of Arbor Cold Distribution Group cordially invites you to the retirement gala honoring Gavin Schneider. It was addressed to Ms. Brianna Schneider, not CEO of Citrine, just the daughter, the estranged daughter. I sat at my desk, turning the invitation over in my hands. The paper felt expensive. It felt like a summons. "Why go?" Noah asked me later, leaning against my doorframe. He knew everything. He was the only one who did. "You have not seen them in 12 years. You do not need to prove anything. You won. Brianna, look around. You won." I looked at the invitation. "I am not going to prove anything," I said. "I am going to watch. Watch what I want to see the product." I said, "I have been auditing the numbers for 3 years. I want to audit the man. I want to see if the reality matches the report." I drove to New Jersey in my own car. A sleek, dark sedan that cost more than Marla's jewelry collection, but looked unassuming to the untrained eye. I wore a black dress that was simple, severe, and impeccably cut. I wore no jewelry except a small citrine stud in each ear, a private joke that only I understood. The Crestview Country Hall was exactly as I remembered it from other people's weddings and fundraisers eager to impress, but slightly dated. I walked in, and the sensation of being a ghost returned instantly. I gave my name to the check-in girl. She scanned the list. "Ah, yes, table 19, she said, her smile faltering slightly as she handed me the card. "It is toward the back." "Of course it is," I thought. I walked through the crowd. I saw faces I recognized from my childhood. Neighbors, parents of kids I went to school with. They looked older, softer. Some of them glanced at me, a flicker of recognition in their eyes, followed quickly by a look of confusion. "Is that the Schneider girl?" "No. It cannot be. She looks too assured." I sat at table 19. It was the exile table. I was seated next to a distant cousin of Marla's who was already drunk, and a former secretary of my father's who had been let go 5 years ago but was apparently still on the obligatory invite list. I drank my water. I watched. Then came the speech. Then came the spotlight. Then came the insult. Uneducated. Worthless. And then came my exit. When I walked out of that hall, leaving my father sputtering in the parking lot, I felt a vibration in my purse. I got into my car, the adrenaline still humming in my veins like high-voltage wire. I locked the doors. I took a breath, letting the silence of the vehicle wash over me. I pulled out my phone. The message was from Noah. From Noah Klein. Time 9:42 p.m. Subject urgent. Arbor Cold negotiation. Brianna. Check the secure portal. We just received an electronic communique from their legal department. It is not just a renewal request. They are panicking. I opened the secure app on my phone, authenticating with my fingerprint. I pulled up the document Noah had flagged. It was a draft addendum to the Citrine service agreement. They were offering a 30% fee increase, 30%. In the logistics world, margins are razor thin. A 30% hike was unheard of. It was desperate. But it was the clause at the bottom that made me sit up straight. Clause 14b. Transparency of ownership, the client. Arbor Cold reserves the right to a full disclosure meeting with the principal owners of the service provider Citrine within 5 business days of signing. I read it twice. They were hunting. I tapped the call button for Noah. He picked up on the first ring. "I see it." I said, "They are spooked." Noah said. His voice was tight. "Someone in their risk management department finally did the math. They realized that Citrine holds the keys to their compliance certification. If we walk, they lose their insurance rating. If they lose that, the bank calls in their operating loans. They want to know who has them by the throat." I said, "Exactly." Noah said, "They are used to bullying vendors. They can't bully a black box. They want a face." I looked out the window at the dark outline of the Crestview Country Hall. Inside, my father was probably trying to salvage his night, drinking expensive scotch and telling everyone that I was unstable. He was telling them he was the king of the jungle. He did not realize he was already in the cage. And the clause I asked, "It is a deal breaker," Noah said. "If we refuse to disclose, they might bluff and say they will find another auditor." "They can't." I said, "Not in 30 days. The FDA requires a 6-month historical data audit for a vendor switch of this magnitude, if they switch now. They have a 5-month gap. Their biggest client, the supermarket chain, will void the contract. So we have leverage. Noah said, "We have all the leverage." I said, "I watched the valet run to retrieve a Bentley for one of the board members." "Noah," I said, "rejection is too simple. What do you want to do?" Reply to the email. I said, "Tell them that Citrine Chain Audits does not disclose ownership structure as a matter of policy to protect our proprietary algorithms. Tell them if they want to renew. They sign our standard agreement by close of business Friday. No addendums, no meetings. And if they push," I smiled in the darkness of the car. "Tell them that if they push, we will release a service interruption notice to their downstream partners, informing them that Arbor Cold is currently without a certified auditor for the upcoming quarter." Noah let out a low whistle. "That is aggressive. That is practically a declaration of war." "No, Noah," I said, starting the engine. "War implies 2 armies fighting. This is just an eviction notice." I hung up. I put the car in drive. As I pulled out of the lot, my phone buzzed again. It was another message from Noah. "One more thing. The IP address tracking on our website. Someone from the Arbor Cold Executive Suite has been hitting our About Us page every 10 minutes for the last hour. They are trying to trace the domain registration." I laughed softly. It was a cold, dry sound. "Let them look," I whispered to the empty car. My domain was registered through a shell company in Delaware, which was owned by a holding company in Nevada, which was owned by the trust my grandmother had set up. They could dig for 100 years and all they would find was paper. But they were getting close. The panic was making them smart, or at least, making them paranoid. I drove toward the highway. The night was dark, but the road ahead was perfectly illuminated by my headlights. My father had spent 40 years building a glass house. He just didn't know that I was the one holding the stones. And I wasn't going to throw them, not yet. I was going to wait until he invited me inside. The morning after the gala, my phone did not ring. It vibrated. It pulsed against the nightstand like a bomb counting down, over and over again. I woke up in my apartment in Baltimore, hundreds of miles away from the scene of the crime, but the digital tendrils of my family reached out to find me. I picked up the device and scrolled through the notifications. It was a masterclass in coordinated gaslighting. There were 17 text messages from Aunt Linda, who had not spoken to me since I was 22, Brianna. "Honey, just heard what happened. We are so worried about your mental state. Please let us know you are safe. From Uncle Dean, the one who usually avoided conflict. Do not let the stress get to you. Everyone has breaking points. Call if you need a doctor recommendation. From a cousin I barely knew. Sending prayers for your recovery." I lay back against the pillows and stared at the ceiling. They were not asking how I was. They were establishing a narrative. My father and Marla had clearly held court after I left. They had spun the story instantly. Brianna did not stand up for herself. Brianna had a breakdown. Brianna was unstable. Brianna was hysterical. It was a brilliant defensive maneuver. If I was crazy, then my words about being the last time you see me were just the ramblings of a sick woman, not a declaration of independence. If I was unwell, then my father's insults were just the tough love of a concerned parent trying to manage a difficult child. I did not reply to a single message. To reply was to step onto their stage. To say, "I am fine," was to validate their premise that there was a question about my sanity. In the world of crisis management, which I navigated every day for my clients, silence was not an admission of guilt. Silence was a vacuum. And if you hold the silence long enough, the other side usually fills it with their own mistakes. I got up, made coffee, and went to work. By 10 in the morning, the second phase of their offensive began. This time, it was professional. My personal cell phone rang. It was a number associated with the Arbor Cold administrative switchboard. I let it go to voicemail. 5 minutes later, it rang again. I picked it up. I needed to gauge their temperature. "Hello," I said. My voice was calm, flat, professional. "Ms. Schneider." It was a woman's voice, I recognized it. It was Sheila, my father's longtime executive assistant. She sounded nervous. Yes, Sheila. Hi, Brianna. Look, I am sorry to bother you on your personal line. She stumbled over the words. She had probably been instructed to treat me like I was holding a grenade. What can I do for you? Sheila. Well, your father. Mr. Schneider asked me to update our emergency contact files, for insurance purposes, and he wanted me to double-check your current employment status. I almost laughed. They were fishing. They were terrified. They had heard rumors about citrine, maybe seen a similarity in the mailing address, or maybe Noah's non-disclosure email had spooked them. They were trying to connect the dots without asking the direct question. I am a consultant. Sheila. I said, Right, a consultant. And the name of the firm. I paused. I could hear her typing on the other end. I work independently. I said, Is there anything else? There was a long silence. Actually, she lowered her voice. Are you okay? Brianna. He was really mad last night, but then he got quiet. Scary quiet. I am fine. Sheila, tell him the files are up to date. I hung up. They were circling. They knew something was wrong in the ecosystem of their control. But they could not quite locate the predator. At noon, the heavy artillery arrived. Marla called. I debated ignoring it. But curiosity won. I wanted to hear the pitch. Hello, Marla, Brianna, darling. Her voice was like warm honey poured over broken glass. I am so glad you picked up. We have been frantic. I am at work. Marla, what do you want? We want you to come home for dinner this weekend, she said. Just a quiet family dinner. Your father is regretful about how things escalated last night. He wants to clear the air. Regretful. Not sorry. Never sorry. He thinks you misunderstood his humor. She continued, smoothing over the cracks as she always did. He loves you. Brianna, he just worries about your lack of direction. We want to help you get back on your feet. I looked around my glass-walled office. I looked at the 18 employees working diligently outside. I looked at the revenue reports on my screen showing a 7-figure quarterly turnover. I am on my feet. Marla, please, she said. And there was a slight edge to her tone now. A command hidden in a plea. Do not be stubborn. You are damaging the family reputation. People are talking. Just come home, apologize to your father, and let us fix this. We can discuss your financial situation. They still thought I needed money. They thought the leverage was a checkbook. I am not coming to dinner. I said, Brianna, goodbye. Marla. I disconnected the call and blocked the number. It was a petty move, perhaps, but it felt like cutting a heavy anchor chain. I left the office an hour later to meet Jillian Hart. We met in a quiet bistro near the harbor, far away from the prying eyes of the New Jersey social circuit. Jillian looked impeccable as always, but her face was grim. She placed a folder on the table between us. I reviewed the contract between Citrine and Arbor Cold. She said, skipping the pleasantries, You are in the clear. The termination clause is standard. Section 8, paragraph 3. Either party may terminate the agreement with 30 days written notice for any reason or no reason at all. Good. I said. However, Jillian tapped the folder. Just because it is legal does not mean it will be clean. I know my father. I said, He will sue. He will do more than sue, Jillian warned. He will try to destroy Citrine's reputation. He will claim you acted in bad faith. He will claim conflict of interest because of your familial relationship. He will try to paint you as a vindictive daughter using a vendor contract to settle a personal score. Let him try. I said, Brianna, if this goes to court, everything comes out, she said. The trust, Iron Creek, the warehouse ownership. I took a sip of iced tea. I am not afraid of the truth coming out. Jillian, I just want to control the timing. She looked at me, assessing my resolve. So, what is the play, she asked. We send the letter today, I said. Formal, cold, no emotion. We cite strategic realignment of client portfolio. We do not mention the gala. We do not mention the insults. We make it look like a boring, bureaucratic business decision. And when he calls you screaming, I will not answer. I said, all communication goes through Noah or through you. Jillian nodded. She pulled a document from the folder. I drafted the letter. She said, it is ready for your signature. I signed it. The ink looked black and final. One more thing, Jillian said. Someone has been digging into the Iron Creek public filings. My father, no, she said. It was a private investigator based in Newark. But here's the interesting part. The retainer was not paid by Arbor Cold. It was paid by a personal checking account. Who's Trent Schneider? She said. I frowned. Trent. My stepbrother usually could not be bothered to investigate a dinner menu, let alone a complex corporate structure. Why would Trent be digging, I asked. Maybe he smells smoke, Jillian said. Or maybe he's looking for leverage against you to impress his daddy. Or maybe, I thought, he is looking for a lifeboat. I went back to the office, the weight of the signed termination letter sitting in my outbox. Noah sent it at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. By 4:15, the atmosphere in my office shifted. I could feel the tension radiating from my phone. Even though it was silent, I knew that in a boardroom in New Jersey, chaos was erupting. But the next contact I received did not come from Gavin, or Marla, or even Trent. It came at 7 in the evening. As I was locking up, my phone buzzed with a notification from a secure messaging app, Signal. I used it for communicating with sensitive whistleblowers in the pharmaceutical industry. Very few people had that contact info. I opened the message. It was from an unknown number. Brianna, it is Savannah, Trent's wife. Please do not block me. I stared at the screen. Savannah. I had met her maybe 5 times. She was a quiet, blonde woman who looked like she had been manufactured in a factory that built perfect corporate wives. She smiled when she was supposed to, laughed when Gavin made a bad joke, and produced 2 grandchildren on schedule. I typed back, how did you get this ID? I saw it on Trent's iPad once. She replied, he was trying to hack into your stuff. He failed. By the way, I waited. I need to tell you something. She wrote, I heard about the party. I heard what Gavin said. And I typed, and I want to vomit. She wrote, they are monsters. Brianna, you got out. I am stuck. I felt a flicker of sympathy. Savannah was not a villain. She was a hostage with a platinum credit card. Why are you messaging me? I asked. Because they are lying about Trent. She replied, they say he is a genius. They say he runs operations. Brianna, he does not do anything. He plays golf. He gambles online. Gavin runs everything. Trent is just a show pony. I knew this. But hearing it confirmed was satisfying. I know. I typed, you do not know everything. She wrote, I found something. I was looking for tax documents for the kids' school, and I found an old file box in the attic. Gavin thinks Marla burned it, but she kept it. She keeps everything, just in case. What is in the box? Evidence. She wrote, Brianna, Trent did not get into that executive program on merit. Gavin bought his way in. A donation. A huge one. That is not surprising. I typed, that is how the world works. No, she replied. You do not understand. Look at where the money came from. An image file appeared on my screen. It was a photo taken in low light, probably in an attic, with a shaky hand, but the document was legible. It was a bank transfer authorization from 12 years ago. It was on Arbor Cold letterhead. The amount was $150,000, but it was the handwritten note in the margins, in my father's distinct, jagged script. That made the air leave the room. There was a line item printed on the form, Target Allocation Education Trust. B. Schneider. My name. My college fund. The money my mother had put aside before she died. The money my father had sworn was lost in the market downturn. It was not lost. In the photo, a thick black marker line was drawn through B. Schneider. Next to it, in red ink, was written Reallocate Executive Donation / Trent S. Immediate. I stared at the image. The pixels blurred as my eyes filled with hot, angry tears. It was not just that he cut me off. He had cannibalized me. He had taken the literal equity of my future money that was legally meant for my education and fed it to the son who had never worked a day in his life. Savannah sent one more message. I just thought you should know. It wasn't a budget cut. Brianna, it was a theft. I saved the image. I backed it up to 3 different servers. I walked out to my car in the dark parking lot. The city of Baltimore hummed around me, alive and indifferent. My father wanted a war. He wanted to paint me as the unstable, emotional daughter who broke under pressure. I looked at the phone in my hand. He had no idea. He had just handed me the ammunition to blow his entire narrative off the face of the earth. I was not unstable. I was armed. Monday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a scalpel cut. The sky over Baltimore was a flat, slate gray, matching the mood inside my office. Noah sat across from me, a single document resting on the glass surface of my desk. It was the termination notice. It was a masterpiece of corporate brevity. It did not mention insults. It did not mention family feuds. It did not mention the gala. It cited strategic realignment of the client portfolio and invoked the standard 30-day exit clause. It was the kind of letter that lawyers hate because there are no emotional hooks to grab onto. It was just business. Is this it? Noah asked. He looked tired. He knew what was coming. He knew that sending this letter was like throwing a match into a powder keg. That is the official one, I said. I opened my drawer and pulled out a smaller envelope. It was cream-colored, identical to the stationery my grandmother used to use. And this is the unofficial one, I said. I had written it the night before. Sitting at my kitchen table with a glass of wine I did not drink, I had written 10 drafts. The first one was angry. The second one was sad. The 10th one was just true. It read, Gavin, Marla, Trent, do not contact me again. I am not your daughter. I am not your sister. And I am certainly not your punchline. I am a separate entity. Respect the boundaries, or I will enforce them. I handed both envelopes to the courier we used for sensitive documents. Get a signature, I told him. And not from the receptionist. I want a signature from the executive suite. The courier nodded and left. I spent the morning working. I approved a new audit protocol for a vaccine distributor in Boston. I reviewed the quarterly bonus structure for my team. I forced myself to focus on the numbers, on the clean, logical world of logistics where actions had predictable consequences. At 11:30 in the morning, my computer pinged. Delivery confirmation. Signed by Patricia Crane. Patricia Crane was the gatekeeper. She was the head of the executive secretariat at Arbor Cold. If she signed for it, it was on my father's desk within 2 minutes. I waited. It took exactly 14 minutes. My personal phone, which I had placed face down on my desk, began to vibrate. I did not turn it over. I knew who it was. It buzzed for 45 seconds. Then it stopped. 10 seconds later, it started again. Then the office line rang. My assistant, Elena, picked it up. Citrine Chain Audits. She said pleasantly. I watched her through the glass wall. Her expression tightened. I am sorry, sir. Mr. Klein is in a meeting. Ms. Schneider is unavailable. No, I cannot interrupt her. No, sir, I do not think that tone is necessary. She hung up. She looked at me through the glass and raised an eyebrow. I nodded at her. Hold the line. For the next 3 hours, my phone was a constant. Angry drumbeat against the desk. Gavin, Marla, Trent, Gavin again. The landline rang 4 more times. I did not answer. I did not flinch. I went to lunch in the break room with my staff. I ate a salad and listened to my data analysts argue about the best way to visualize humidity variance. It was normal. It was sane. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Elena walked into my office. She did not knock. There is a car, she said. What kind? A black Mercedes SUV. New Jersey plates. They parked in the handicap spot. Of course they did. They are in the lobby, Elena said. A man, a woman, and a younger man. The older man is loud. He is demanding to see the owner. I stood up. I smoothed the front of my dress. I checked my reflection in the monitor. I did not look like the girl in the black dress at table 19 anymore. I looked like the CEO of a company that generated $8 million in annual revenue. Bring them to conference room B. I said. The glass one, Elena asked. Everyone will see them. Exactly. I said. I waited 5 minutes. I wanted them to sit in the room. I wanted them to look around. I wanted them to see the busy, thriving office outside the glass. I wanted them to see the team of professionals working on dual monitors, the server lights blinking in the server room, the awards on the wall. I wanted them to realize that this was not a hobby. I walked out of my office and down the hall. I held a thin file folder in my hand. I opened the door to conference room B. The 3 of them were standing. They looked out of place in the modern, industrial aesthetic of my office. Gavin was wearing a suit that looked too stiff. Marla was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors. Trent was pacing, his face red. Brianna Gavin barked as soon as I entered. He started to move toward me, his finger pointing in that familiar, accusatory gesture. What the hell is this? He threw the termination letter onto the conference table. It slid across the polished wood. Sit down. Gavin, I said. I did not raise my voice. I did not step back. I walked to the head of the table and placed my folder down. Do not tell me to sit down, he shouted. You cannot just cancel a contract like this. Do you have any idea what this does to us? We have the supermarket audit next week. If we do not have your certification, we fail. Then you should have thought about that before you called your auditor worthless in front of 200 people. I said. Trent slammed his hand on the table. You are being a bitch. Brianna, he yelled. You are doing this just to spite us. You are trying to ruin the family business because you are jealous. I looked at Trent. I looked at the boy who had taken my college fund. I looked at the man who was playing executive while I was building an empire. Jealous, I asked quietly. I pressed a button on the wall panel. The glass walls of the conference room turned from clear to opaque frost, cutting off the view from the outside. But the soundproofing remained. My team could not see us anymore, but I knew they were aware of the energy. This is not a family dispute. I said, this is a business decision. Citrine Chain Audits is restructuring. We are shedding high-maintenance, low-margin clients. Arbor Cold is a liability. Your payment terms are slow. Your compliance data is messy, and your management is volatile. Marla stepped forward. She took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were rimmed with red. But I knew Marla. She could summon tears on command. Brianna, please, she said, her voice trembling. We are family. You cannot treat your father like a vendor. He is under so much pressure. The gala was, he had too much to drink. He did not mean it. He meant every word. I said, he has meant it for 12 years. Marla reached for my hand. I pulled it back. We can fix this, she said. We can talk about a raise in your allowance. Is that it? Do you need money? I laughed. I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that seemed to startle them. Money, I asked. I opened the folder. I pulled out 3 documents. The first was the incorporation paper of Citrine Chain Audits, LLC. The second was the annual tax return for the company, showing a net profit that was double what Arbor Cold had posted in their last public filing. The third was the contract Arbor Cold had signed with Citrine 3 years ago. I slid them toward my father. Read the signature line. Gavin. I said. He looked at the papers. He frowned. He picked up the contract. He had signed it 3 years ago, but he had never looked at the counter-signature. He had let his legal team handle it. He looked at the bottom of the page. Signed, Brianna Schneider, CEO/founder. Citrine Chain Audits. His face went gray. It was not a pale gray. It was an ashen, sick color. He looked up at me, then back at the paper. You, he whispered. You stood on that stage, I said, leaning forward, my hands flat on the table. You stood there, and you told everyone that the people behind Citrine were geniuses. You bragged about how you secured the best auditors in the business. You said, those guys are sharks. I paused. I am the shark. Dad? Trent grabbed the tax return. His eyes widened as he saw the numbers. No way, he muttered. This is fake. You were working the night shift at a trucking depot. I was building... Trent? I said, while you were spending my tuition money on spring break trips. I was building this. I gestured to the room, to the building, to the reality around us. Gavin dropped the paper. He looked at me as if he had never seen me before. For the first time, the arrogance was gone, replaced by a terrifying clarity. He realized that the narrative he had invented, the story of the useless daughter, was a lie. And worse, he realized he had been paying me to save his company for 3 years. "You tricked me," he said hoarsely. "I did not trick you." I said, "I operated under a standard LLC. You just never bothered to look. You never bothered to ask. You assumed I was nothing. So you never looked for me in the place where power lives." Marla tried a different angle. She moved to the side of the table, trying to flank me. "If you are the owner," she said, her voice gaining a new, sharp urgency, "then you can stop this termination. You can sign the renewal. Brianna, think about the legacy. This company supports the family. It supports you. It does not support me." I said, "I support me. But we are family," Marla cried out, hitting the table with her fist. "You cannot destroy your family." I looked at her. I looked at the woman who had told me my only value was in finding a husband. "We share a last name, Marla." I said, "That is biology. Family is behavior. Family is showing up. Family is not stealing a child's education fund to buy a prestige degree for another. Family is not mocking someone to 200 strangers. You do not have a family here." I said, "You have a vendor, and that vendor has just fired you." Gavin stood up. He was shaking. "You cannot do this," he said. "I just did. I will sue you," he threatened. But the fire was gone. It was a reflex, not a plan. "Go ahead," I said. "My lawyer is Jillian Hart. You might know her. She is the one who handles the lawsuits you cannot win." Gavin froze at the mention of Jillian's name. He knew Hart and Weller. He knew they were expensive and lethal. He looked at the termination letter again. 30 days, he muttered. "You are giving us 30 days. That is what the contract says," I replied. He looked up at me. His eyes were bloodshot. He looked old. "What do you want?" he asked. The question hung in the air. It was the transactional question. He thought this was a negotiation. He thought there was a price. He thought if he wrote a check, or offered an apology, or gave me a seat on the board, it would go away. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had defined my worth by my utility to him. I reached into the folder one last time. I pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was not a legal document. It was a printout of a spreadsheet. It was the lease roll for the Newark distribution hub, the massive warehouse that was the beating heart of Arbor Cold's operation, the building they did not own, the building they were currently trying to renew the lease on. I slid it across the table. "I do not want your money." "Gavin," I said, "I do not want your apology." He looked down at the paper. His eyes scanned the columns. He saw the landlord entity Iron Creek Industrial Holdings. He looked confused. "Keep reading." I said, "Look at the signatory for the landlord." He looked. His finger traced the line. Iron Creek Industrial Holdings, represented by the trustee of the E. Schneider Trust. He looked up. "Mother," he whispered. "Grandma." I corrected. I leaned in close, so close I could smell the fear on him. "I want you to understand something. Dad, you are not just losing your auditor." I tapped the paper. "I want you to realize that the roof over your head, the floor under your trucks, the very ground your empire stands on belongs to me." I stood up straight and walked to the door. "You have 30 days to find a new auditor," I said. And Gavin, he looked at me, stunned, silenced, shattered. "Start packing," I said, "because the rent is due." The fallout of truth is rarely an explosion. In the movies, the building collapses in a ball of fire. In the corporate world, it is more like watching a suspension bridge lose its tension cables one by one. You hear the snap, you see the structure shudder, and then you wait for gravity to do the rest. I did not have to lift a finger after Monday. The termination notice was a stone dropped into a still lake, and the ripples began to spread outward, touching shores I had not visited in years. By Tuesday afternoon, the logistics industry in the tri-state area was buzzing. The sector is small. Everyone knows everyone. People talk at trade shows, in hotel bars, and on golf courses. The rumor started simply, Arbor Cold Distribution Group had lost its compliance certification. Then it mutated. Arbor Cold lost citrine. Then the irony set in. Wait, isn't the CEO of Citrine the daughter Gavin Schneider just roasted at his retirement party? I sat in my office in Baltimore, watching the chaos from a distance. I did not issue a press release. I did not post a vindictive status update on social media. I did not give an anonymous quote to the Wall Street Journal. My silence was heavier than anything I could have said. By refusing to speak, I forced them to fill the void with their own panic. And panic is a terrible architect. My sources told me that the atmosphere inside the Arbor Cold headquarters was toxic. The board of directors, a group of men and women who had happily eaten Gavin's steak and drunk his wine for decades, were suddenly very interested in the details of the operation. They summoned Trent. I heard about it from a headhunter friend of mine who had suddenly received 3 resumes from senior Arbor Cold managers in a single afternoon. Apparently, the board asked Trent a very simple question. Why did we build our entire compliance infrastructure around a single vendor that we have no personal relationship with Trent? Having no answer because he did not understand how the infrastructure worked in the first place, had stuttered. He blamed the previous operations manager. He blamed the market. He blamed me. But the board was not interested in blame. They were interested in risk. And right now, Arbor Cold was radioactive. Finding a replacement auditor for a cold chain operation of that size is not like switching internet providers. You cannot just call a competitor and have them start on Monday. A new auditor needs to validate 6 months of temperature data. They need to inspect the sensors. They need to certify the trucks. It is a process that takes 60 to 90 days. I had given them 30 days. That meant for at least 1 month and likely 2. Arbor Cold would be operating without a safety net. Their insurance premiums would triple. Their clients, specifically the massive supermarket chains that demanded perfection, would void their contracts. The dominoes were clicking against each other. Click, click, click. On Thursday, Noah walked into my office. He looked conflicted. They called again. He said, "Who their chief financial officer?" "Not your father. The actual money guy. And he is offering to double the rate." Noah said. He sat down, looking at the numbers on his tablet. "Brianna, look at this objectively. If we renegotiate, we could charge them a 50% premium. We could demand a 5-year lock-in. It would fund our expansion into the West Coast market instantly." I looked at Noah. He was a good man, but he was a businessman. He saw a distressed asset and he wanted to acquire value from it. "No," I said. "Brianna, it is $2 million a year in pure profit." He pressed. "It is not about the money." "Noah, it is always about the money." He countered gently. "Not this time," I said. I turned my monitor so he could see the email I was drafting to a new client, a pharmaceutical giant that had approached us specifically because they heard we had the integrity to fire a non-compliant partner, even if it was a family legacy. "Noah," I said, leaning back, "if I take their money now, I am telling them that my boundaries have a price tag. I am telling them that abuse is acceptable as long as you pay a 50% premium for it." I paused. "Besides," I added, "I do not want to save them. I want to replace them." Noah looked at me for a long moment. Then he smiled. A slow, appreciative smile. "You are terrifying," he said. "I am focused," I corrected. The social fallout was faster and uglier than the business one. The elite circle of New Jersey, the people who had laughed when Gavin called me uneducated, were now scrambling to rewrite history. I received emails from people who had been at the party. "Dear Brianna, I always knew you were special. Brianna, we must catch up. I have an investment opportunity I would love your eyes on." I deleted them all. They were not apologizing for laughing. They were apologizing for betting on the wrong horse. But the most satisfying silence came from the industry itself. Arbor Cold's competitors were circling. I received inquiries from 3 other distribution firms in the region. They wanted to know if Citrine had capacity. We did not. But I made capacity. I authorized the hiring of 5 new analysts. I did not poach them aggressively, but I put the word out that Citrain was hiring. 2 of the best logistics coordinators from Arbor Cold applied within 48 hours. I interviewed them myself. One of them, a woman named Sarah, who had worked for my father for 10 years, sat in my office and looked at me with wide eyes. I was at the party. "Ms. Schneider," she said quietly. "You can call me Brianna," I said, "and please, do not worry about the party." She shook her head. "When you walked out, we all thought you were crazy. But then, on Monday, when the termination letter hit, the silence in the executive wing was absolute. I have never heard your father be quiet before. It was like he had seen a ghost." "He did," I said. "He saw the ghost of the person he thought I was." I hired her on the spot. She knew where the bodies were buried at Arbor Cold, and more importantly, she knew how to properly calibrate a refrigerated truck. By the second week, the cracks in the Schneider family facade were becoming canyons. I was working late on a Tuesday when my private phone rang. It was Savannah. I hesitated. I did not want to be dragged back into the emotional mud, but the image of that bank transfer she had sent me, the one showing my college fund being stolen, was still burned into my retina. I answered, "Hello, Savannah." She was crying. It was not the polite, stifled crying of a socialite. It was the ugly, gasping sobbing of a woman who is watching her life dissolve. "They are destroying him. Brianna," she choked out. "Who, Gavin? Marla. They are pinning it all on Trent." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. "Tell me." "The board called a special inquiry," she said, her voice shaking. "They wanted to know about the lack of redundancy in the audit supply chain." Gavin stood up. He stood up in front of everyone and said that Trent was in charge of vendor relations. He said he had delegated that responsibility to Trent 5 years ago. I frowned. That is a lie. Gavin never delegates anything. He micromanages the color of the paper clips. "I know," Savannah cried, "but there are memos." Gavin produced memos. Emails from Trent's account approving Citrine as the sole vendor. Emails declining other bids. I closed my eyes. Of course, Gavin had used Trent's email access, or he had forced Trent to sign things he did not read. Trent was the perfect scapegoat, incompetent enough to be believable, but titled enough to take the fall. "He is going to fire him." "Brianna," Savannah whispered, "Gavin is going to fire his own son to save his own skin. He is going to tell the board that Trent messed up, and he is going to sacrifice him to keep his CEO chair." It was classic Gavin. Survive at all costs. Eat your young if you have to. "Savannah, listen to me," I said. "You need to get out." "I can't," she sobbed. "We have no money. The house is in the company name. The cars are leased by the company. If Trent gets fired, we are on the street. And Gavin knows it. He is holding it over us. He told Trent if he takes the fall quietly, he will keep paying the mortgage. If Trent fights, he cuts us off, like he cut you off." The rage that flared in my chest was cold and white-hot. It was the same rage I had felt 12 years ago, but now it had nowhere to go but into action. He did not just cut me off. "Savannah," I said, "he stole from me, and he stole from Trent too. In a way, he stole his ability to be a man." "Brianna," Savannah said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "That photo I sent you. The fund transfer?" "Yes, I found more." I held my breath. "I went back to the attic," she said. "I was looking for the original deed to our house, hoping maybe it was in Trent's name. I didn't find the deed, but I found the ledger regarding your mother's estate." My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. "What did you find?" "There was a consent form," Savannah said. "For the release of the funds, the bank required a signature from the guardian and a signature from the executor of your mother's will to bypass the age restriction. My mother's executor was her brother, my uncle Marcus. He died 10 years ago. The form has Marcus's signature on it," Savannah said. "But Brianna, I have seen Marcus's handwriting on old birthday cards. This does not look like Marcus's signature. It looks like Gavin trying to write like Marcus." I finished for her. Silence. "If he forged that signature," Savannah said, her voice trembling with the weight of the realization. Then it is not just theft. It is bank fraud. It is a federal crime. I looked out at the city lights of Baltimore. Send it to me. I said, I cannot, she said. If they catch me, Savannah. I said, my voice hard. Do you want to be a hostage for the rest of your life? Do you want your children to grow up watching their father be treated like a sacrificial animal? No, she whispered. Then send me the document, and then pack a bag. If Gavin fires Trent, you come to Baltimore. I will put you up. I will help you. But I need that paper. 2 minutes later, my phone pinged. I looked at the image. It was a scanned PDF this time. Savannah had been smart enough to use a scanning app. I saw the signature, Marcus Daly. It was a clumsy forgery. The loop on the D was too sharp. It had the aggressive slant of my father's hand. I forwarded the document immediately to Jillian Hart. Then I called her. Jillian, I said, I just sent you something nuclear. I am opening it now. She said, I could hear the click of her mouse. There was a long pause. Oh, Jillian said softly. Is it enough, I asked, to prove fraud? Maybe, she said. We would need a handwriting expert. But Brianna, this is dated 14 years ago. The statute of limitations on bank fraud is typically 10 years. I felt a sinking sensation in my stomach. So he gets away with it. Not necessarily, Jillian said. Her voice took on that sharp, predatory tone I loved. The statute of limitations applies to criminal prosecution. But if we can prove that this fraudulent act was the basis for the financial disclosures he made to the Arbor Cold Board regarding his personal solvency, that is a different story. Explain. I said, Arbor Cold is a private company, but it has shareholders, she said, and it has bank covenants. Every year, Gavin has to sign a statement of financial condition. If he listed those funds as his own assets, or if he used the stolen money to buy his initial equity stake in the company expansion, then the fruit of the poisonous tree applies, meaning if the root is rotten, the whole tree is compromised, she said. And there is something else. What I have been digging into the Iron Creek lease agreements, Jillian said. The ones your father signed. Yes, I need you to sit down. Brianna, I am sitting. We always assumed your father didn't know about Iron Creek's ownership, right? We assumed he was just a tenant. That was the whole point. I said, well, Jillian said, I found a clause in the original lease from 10 years ago. It is a right of first refusal clause. It says that if the building is ever sold, the tenant has the right to match the offer. Okay, that is standard. It is standard, Jillian agreed. But in the disclosure section, where the landlord has to list any potential conflicts of interest, there is a checked box. Which box? The box that says tenant acknowledges that a familial relation may exist between the beneficial owners of the landlord entity and the tenant. I frowned. Wait, if he checked that box, it means he knew, Jillian said, or at least, he suspected. But if he knew I owned the building, or that the trust owned the building, why would he treat me like garbage? Why would he risk insulting his landlord because of the date? Jillian said, he signed this 10 years ago. You were 22. You were working night shifts. He probably thought beneficial owner meant your grandmother. He thought he was renting from his mother, not his daughter. But Evelyn is dead. I said, exactly, Jillian said, and when she died. The trust transferred to you, but Gavin never asked for an updated disclosure. He thinks he is still renting from his dead mother's estate. He thinks he is safe because he assumes the estate is passive. I sat back in my chair. He thinks he is dealing with a ghost. I said, and that gives us an opening, Jillian said, because he just sent a letter to Iron Creek. To the landlord. It arrived at my office this morning. He is trying to bypass Citrine. He is trying to ask the landlord for an extension on the lease to use as collateral for a bank loan. He needs cash to hire a new auditor. He is trying to mortgage my building to pay for the mess he created by firing me. I said, the irony was suffocating. He needs a signature from the landlord. Jillian said, I looked at the forgery on my screen. I looked at the termination letter on my desk. He wants a signature, I asked. Yes. Then let's give him one. I said, what do you mean? I mean, it is time to stop hiding behind the trust. I said, I want a forensic audit of that signature on the college fund, and I want to respond to his lease request. How Jillian asked, invite him to a meeting. I said, tell him the landlord is willing to discuss the lease extension in person. Tell him the beneficial owner will be present. Brianna. Are you sure? Jillian asked. If you walk into that room as the landlord, there is no going back. You destroy him. I looked at the photo of the forged signature again. I thought about Trent being sacrificed. I thought about my mother's money paying for the suit Gavin wore while he mocked me. I am not destroying him. Jillian, I said, I am just evicting him. Set the meeting. Friday at 9, at the Arborcold headquarters. Why there? Because, I said, standing up and walking to the window, I want to do it in the room where he thinks he is king. Cliffhanger, 2 hours later. Jillian called back. The meeting is set, she said. But Brianna, there is one more thing. What the forensic accountant just got back to me about the college fund document. The forgery, it is definitely not Marcus, but it is not Gavin either. I froze. What? We compared it to samples of Gavin's writing. It is too smooth. The pressure points are different, but we ran it against other family documents, and it matches the handwriting on the household checks from that era. Jillian said, the person who signed your future away. The person who stole your mother's money to give to Trent was not your father. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was Marla. Jillian said, I dropped the phone. It hit the desk with a crack that sounded like a bone breaking. Marla, the woman who smiled, the woman who baked casseroles, the woman who told me I just needed to find a husband. She hadn't just watched the theft, she had executed it. And suddenly, the game changed. I wasn't just hunting a king anymore, I was hunting a queen. The revelation that Marla had signed the transfer document sat in my stomach like a stone swallowed whole. I spent the night staring at the scanned image on my laptop screen, tracing the loop of the forged signature with my cursor. It was a perfect crime of opportunity. My father had the motive, but Marla had the hand. The next morning, the phone rang. It was not a blocked number. It was a contact I had not heard from in a decade. Uncle Dean. Dean Schneider was my father's younger brother. In the grand narrative of the Schneider family, Gavin was the king, and Dean was the court jester who had been banished to the stables. He was a soft man, an artist who had never fit into the cutthroat culture of logistics. He ran a small framing shop in Vermont and was generally regarded by the family as a failure because he did not drive a luxury car. I picked up the phone. Hello? Uncle Dean. Brianna. His voice was thin, reedy, shaking slightly. I heard what happened, the gala, the termination letter, the rumors. News travels fast. I said, it does when the empire is shaking. He said, listen, Brianna, I have not been a good uncle. I stayed away because Gavin made it very hard to stay close, but I cannot stay quiet anymore. Not with what I am hearing. What are you hearing that he is blaming Trent? Dean said, that he is telling people Trent mishandled the funds, that he is telling people you are mentally unstable. That is his standard playbook, I said. Dean took a deep breath. I could hear the crackle of the connection. Brianna, you need to know about the money. I know about the money. Dean, I said, Savannah found the transfer order. I know they moved my mother's college fund to Trent. You know the how. Dean said, but you do not know the why. I waited. Your mother. Catherine, she did not just leave you money in a savings account. Dean said, she set up a specific educational trust. She worked double shifts at the hospital for years to build that. It was airtight, or it was supposed to be. Then how did they get it? Because Gavin lied to the bank. Dean said, he told them you were in legal trouble. He told them the money was needed for a legal defense fund to keep you out of juvenile detention. He fabricated a police report. Brianna. He invented a crime you never committed so he could break the seal on the trust. I felt the air leave my lungs. A fake police report. He had criminalized me on paper before I was even old enough to vote, just to steal the money my mother had died to save. And Marla, I asked. She was the architect. Dean said. Gavin wanted the money for the company expansion. He was cash poor. He was going to use it for operations. But Marla said no. She said if they were going to take the risk of breaking the trust, it had to be for Trent. She negotiated it. Brianna. She traded her silence on his fraud for Trent's future. I closed my eyes. It all made sense. The sudden influx of cash for Trent's executive program, the way Marla looked at me with that cold, pitying smile. She was not just a passive beneficiary, she was a co-conspirator. Why are you telling me this now? I asked. Because Mother knew. Dean said, Grandma Evelyn. Yes, she found out about a year after you left. She found the bank records. She confronted Gavin. It was the biggest fight they ever had. I was there. I saw her throw a glass vase at his head. She told him he was dead to her, but she didn't turn him in. I said, she wanted to. Dean said, but she knew that if she sent Gavin to jail, the company would collapse, and there would be nothing left for anyone. So she did the only thing she could. She cut him out of her will. She took every penny she had, every asset, every property, and she locked it away, into Iron Creek. I whispered. Exactly, Dean said. She told me before she died. Dean, I am building a bunker for Brianna. One day, she is going to need a place to stand while she watches them drown. I gripped the phone. She tried to tell me. I said, in her letters, but I never knew the extent of it. She was protecting you. Dean said, she wanted you to build your own strength first. She knew that if you got the money too young, Gavin would just find a way to take it again. She waited until you were a wolf. Brianna, I am not a wolf. Uncle Dean, I said softly, I am just the auditor. Wolves cull the herd. Brianna, he said, and this herd is sick. We hung up. I sat in silence for a long time, watching the gray light of the morning filter through the glass walls of my office. I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger was gone. Anger is hot. It burns fast. What I felt now was cold. It was the absolute zero of space. I called Jillian Hart. I want to see you. I said. I drove to New York that afternoon. We met in her office, the same room where she had first revealed the trust to me. I told her everything Dean had said. I showed her the notes I had taken. Jillian listened, her face impassive, her pen tapping rhythmically against her legal pad. So, she said, leaning back, we have bank fraud. We have filing a false police report. Though that is likely statute barred, we have breach of fiduciary duty, and we have the forgery Marla committed. She looked at me. You have 2 roads. Brianna, tell me. Road 1, she said. We file a civil suit. We do it quietly. We lay out the evidence of the theft and the fraud. We demand a settlement that covers the stolen funds plus interest and punitive damages. They will settle. Gavin will be terrified of this becoming public. You walk away with maybe $2 or $3 million, and you never have to see them again. And Road 2. Road 2 is the mirror, Jillian said. The mirror. We do not sue for money, she said. We use the evidence to challenge his fitness to lead. We take this to the board of directors of Arbor Cold. We show them that their CEO financed his initial stake in the company with stolen funds and maintained his position through fraud. What happens then? He is removed for cause, Jillian said. He loses his severance. He loses his reputation. Marla faces potential criminal charges for the forgery if the DA decides to pick it up. The company goes into a tailspin. I looked out the window at the Manhattan skyline. I do not want the company to crash. I said, there are 200 employees at Arbor Cold. Drivers, warehouse workers, secretaries, people who have families. If the company goes under, they lose everything. Then you have a difficult choice, Jillian said. Because if you expose him, the blast radius will be wide. I thought about the letter my grandmother had left me. Do not be cruel. Just tell the truth. I am not doing this for revenge. Jillian, I said, I am doing this for correction. A ledger has to balance. You cannot have a debit without a credit. Before we could decide, my phone buzzed. It was an email notification. From Gavin Schneider via Executive Assistant Subject Settlement Proposal. Confidential. I opened it. It was a letter on arbor cold letterhead, but the tone was pure Gavin. It was a mix of begging and bullying. Brianna, let us be reasonable. We are willing to offer Citrine a 1-year contract extension at a 15% rate increase. In exchange, you will sign a non-disclosure agreement regarding all family financial matters and issue a public statement clarifying that your departure from the gala was due to a sudden illness. However, the letter continued, shifting tone abruptly. If you persist in this hostility, we will be forced to release information regarding your academic struggles and your history of emotional instability to the industry press. We will paint this as a vendetta by a disgruntled child. Do not test me. I handed the phone to Jillian. She read it and laughed. A dry, humorless sound. He is trying to blackmail you with a lie he invented, she said. He forgot that you hold the aces. I took the phone back. I typed a reply. It was 1 sentence. To Gavin Schneider, all future correspondence must be directed to my legal counsel, Ms. Jillian Hart of Hart and Weller. I hit send. That felt good. Didn't it? Jillian asked. It felt like closing a door. I said, but the door was about to be kicked open from the other side. The next morning, back in Baltimore, a courier arrived at Citrine. This package was not from Gavin. It was on heavy, bonded paper with the seal of the Arbor Cold Distribution Group Board of Directors. I opened it. To Ms. Brianna Schneider, CEO, Citrine Chain Audits. To the trustee of Iron Creek Industrial Holdings, Dear Ms. Schneider, the Board of Directors has recently become aware of certain irregularities in our lease agreements and vendor compliance certifications. Furthermore, it has come to our attention via an internal audit that there is a significant overlap in the beneficial ownership of our primary landlord and our primary compliance auditor. We are convening an emergency session of the board this Friday at 10 in the morning. We formally request your presence to clarify the nature of these relationships and to discuss the continuity of Arbor Cold's operations. Sincerely, Marcus Thorne, Chairman of the Board. I stared at the letter. They figured it out. I said. Noah, who was standing in the doorway, whistled low. They did not just figure it out. Brianna. They connected the landlord and the auditor. They realized they are surrounded. This was not Gavin. Gavin would never call a board meeting that would expose him. This was the independent directors, the money men, the ones who cared about the stock price, not the family drama. I called Jillian. You got the letter, she asked. I did. Thorne is a serious man. Jillian said, he is Wall Street. He smells a rat. And he's trying to figure out if the rat is Gavin or you. What do I do? You go, Jillian said. You have to go. If you refuse, they will assume you are acting in bad faith. They will void the lease and sue Citrine for conspiracy. So I walk into the lion's den. I said, no, Jillian said. Her voice was sharp, cutting through my hesitation. You are looking at this wrong. How should I look at it, Brianna? You own the building. You control the compliance certification. You have proof that the CEO committed fraud, and you have the capital to back it up. She paused. You are not walking into the lion's den, she said. You are the zookeeper. I took a breath. I will go. I said, I spent the next 48 hours preparing. I did not sleep. I worked with Noah to compile every audit report, every safety violation, every instance where Gavin had overruled a safety protocol to save money. I worked with Jillian to organize the trust documents, the proof of the forged signature, and the bank transfer records. I was building a case, not a criminal case, but a corporate execution. On Friday morning, I dressed in a suit that was sharper than anything I had ever worn. It was navy blue, the color of authority. I pulled my hair back. I put on the citrine earrings. I drove to New Jersey. The Arbor Cold headquarters was a glass and steel building that looked impressive from the highway but up close. You could see the cracks in the pavement and the faded paint on the sign. It was a metaphor for the man who ran it. I walked into the lobby. The receptionist, a new girl who did not know me, asked for my ID. I am Brianna Schneider. I said, The board is expecting me." She looked at her list, and her eyes went wide. "Oh, yes. They are in the main boardroom, the penthouse level." I took the elevator up. The numbers ticked by. 1, 2, 3. My heart should have been racing, but it wasn't. I felt that cold. Clinical detachment again. I was an auditor. I was here to check the books, and the books were unbalanced. The elevator doors opened. Patricia Crane was standing there. She looked pale. "They are waiting," she whispered. "Your father, he is in there. He is furious." I nodded to her. "Thank you, Patricia." I walked toward the double mahogany doors. I stopped for a moment. I thought about the girl who had sat at table 19. I thought about the girl who had eaten rice and beans in a studio apartment in Baltimore. I thought about the girl who had been told she was furniture. I pushed the doors open. The boardroom was massive. A long oval table dominated the space. Around it sat 12 people, men in expensive suits, women with serious faces. At the head of the table sat Marcus Thorne, the chairman. To his right sat Gavin. Gavin looked terrible. His face was blotchy. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, he stood up, his chair scraping violently against the floor. "She has no right to be here," he shouted. "This is a family matter. Sit down." "Gavin," Thorne said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of absolute authority. Thorne looked at me. He did not smile. "Ms. Schneider," he said. "Thank you for coming. Please, take a seat." There was one empty chair. It was at the opposite end of the table, directly facing Gavin. I walked over to it. I placed my briefcase on the table. I sat down. "We have a lot of questions," Thorne said, "about conflicts of interest, about lease leverage, about the stability of this company." I folded my hands on the table. "I have answers, Mr. Thorne," I said. "But first, I think you should see the documents that explain why I am the one holding the keys to this building." I reached for my briefcase. Gavin lunged forward. "Do not listen to her. She is vindictive. She is trying to steal my company." I stopped. I looked at him. "It is not your company." "Gavin," I said. I looked at Thorne. "And it is not just about the lease," I said. Jillian leaned over and whispered in my ear, her voice low enough that only I could hear, but loud enough to echo in my mind. "Brianna," she said, "remember, you are not just a supplier anymore. Legally, with the combination of the lease default clauses and the debt covenants Gavin violated by committing fraud, you are the senior creditor." She pulled back and looked at me. "You can call the loan," she said. "You can force the bankruptcy, or you can take the keys." I looked at the board. I looked at my father. I realized then that Jillian was right. I wasn't just here to testify. I was here to foreclose. I opened the briefcase. "Let us begin," I said. The air in the boardroom was not just cold. It was sterilized. It was the kind of artificial chill that is pumped in to keep computers from overheating and executives from sweating. Though in Gavin Schneider's case, the system was failing. I sat at the far end of the oval mahogany table, my hands clasped loosely in front of me. To my left sat Jillian Hart, my legal counsel, looking like a shark in a silk blouse. To my right sat the empty chair where truth usually sat. Waiting to be acknowledged, across from me, at the head of the table, was Marcus Thorne, the chairman of the board. Flanking him were 6 other board members, men and women who represented the pension funds and investment banks that actually owned Arbor Cold. And then there was Gavin. My father stood near the whiteboard, a marker in his hand, looking like a general trying to explain why the war was lost. He was manic. His tie was slightly loosened, a violation of his own strict dress code. "Gentlemen, ladies," Gavin said, his voice booming with a forced confidence that fooled no one. "This is a hostile takeover attempt. It is nothing less. My daughter." He pointed the marker at me like a weapon. "My daughter has a history of emotional instability. She holds a grudge because she was not suited for the corporate environment here. Now she is using a vendor contract to hold us hostage." He looked around the room, seeking allies. "I am asking the board to authorize an emergency injunction against Citrine chain audits," Gavin continued. We need to sue for breach of contract and malicious interference. We cannot let a disgruntled child dictate our operations." Marcus Thorne did not look at Gavin. He looked at me. "Ms. Schneider," Thorne said, his voice dry as parchment, "you have heard the accusation. Is Citrine Chain Audits acting with malicious intent?" I stood up. I did not rush. I smoothed the front of my jacket. "Mr. Thorne," I said, "I am not here as a daughter. I am here as the CEO of a company that audits risk. And right now, Arbor Cold is the biggest risk on my books." I walked over to the side of the table where I had set up my presentation. I did not use the whiteboard. I used 3 simple file folders. I placed the first folder on the table. Fact number 1. I said, "I am the sole owner of Citrine Chain Audits. My father claims I was uneducated and worthless. The market disagrees. Citrine generates $8 million in annual revenue. We audit the supply chains for 3 of the top 5 pharmaceutical companies in the country. We do not operate on emotion. We operate on data." I opened the folder. It contained the termination notice and the supporting data logs. Fact number 2. I continued. "Citrine terminated the contract with Arbor Cold legally and ethically. We did not do it to hurt feelings. We did it because Arbor Cold has failed 7 critical safety audits in the last 6 months." I slid the papers down the table toward Thorne. "Your drivers are overriding temperature controls to save fuel." I said, "Your warehouse managers are falsifying cleaning logs. We flagged these issues to your CEO 3 times. He ignored them to save operating costs. Citrine certifies safety. We cannot certify negligence." Gavin slammed his hand on the table. "Those are lies," he shouted. "Minor variances. You are exaggerating to make me look bad." I ignored him. I placed the second folder on the table. Fact number 3. I said. The room went quiet. This was the card they did not know I held. Arbor Cold is currently attempting to renew the lease on its primary distribution hub in Newark. I said, "It is your most critical asset. Without that building, you have nowhere to put the trucks." I looked at Gavin. "You sent a letter to the landlord, Iron Creek Industrial Holdings, asking for an extension and attempting to leverage the lease for a bank loan." I said, "That is standard business," Gavin snapped. "What do you know about it?" "I know about it." I said, "Because I am the landlord." A collective gasp went around the table. It wasn't loud, just a sharp intake of breath from 6 people at once. Thorne's eyes widened. "Excuse me," Thorne asked. "The Evelyn Schneider Trust owns 40% of Iron Creek." I said, "I am the sole beneficiary of that trust." I slid the deed across the table. "My father has been negotiating with a ghost." I said, "He thought he was dealing with a faceless corporation. He was dealing with the daughter he disowned." Gavin stared at the deed. His face turned a color I had never seen before, a pale, sickly gray. "You," he whispered, "you cannot own it. Mother would never. Grandma Evelyn saw who you were." "Gavin," I said, "she locked the assets away to keep them safe from you. And now, as the landlord, I am informing the board that Iron Creek is rejecting the lease renewal application." "Rejection?" Thorne asked sharply. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that the tenant is insolvent and managed by an executive who commits fraud." I said, "Fraud." Gavin screamed. He lunged toward me, but a security guard stepped forward, blocking his path. "You little liar. I built this company. I paid for your life. I have never committed fraud." I placed the third folder on the table. This was the thin one, the one with the image Savannah had sent me. I did not speak. I just slid the folder to Marcus Thorne. It contained the bank transfer record from 12 years ago. The one showing $150,000 moved from the education fund, B. Schneider, to the executive donation, Trent S. And underneath it, the forensic report on the signature. Thorne opened the folder. He put on his reading glasses. He looked at the document. He looked at the signature. "What is this?" Thorne asked. "That is proof of the seed capital." I said. I looked at the board. "My father claims he funded the expansion of Arbor Cold 12 years ago with his own savings. That was the basis of his solvency disclosure to this board. That was the money that secured your initial investment." I pointed to the document. "He did not use his money." I said, He stole a trust fund established by my late mother for my education. He forged a signature, or rather, he had his wife forge a signature to access federal banking funds. He then laundered that money into a donation to buy my stepbrother a seat in a university program and used the remainder to shore up his equity in this company. The silence in the room was absolute. It was heavy enough to crush a man. Gavin was shaking his head. No, that is private. That is a family matter. It is bank fraud. I said, and because you listed those assets on your corporate disclosure forms, it is securities fraud. I looked at Thorne. If you renew his contract, I said, you are complicit. As the auditor, I am telling you the books are cooked. As the landlord, I am telling you the tenant is in default. And as the victim of the theft, I am telling you that I am filing a report with the district attorney tomorrow morning. Gavin looked at the board. He looked at the men he had played golf with for 20 years. He looked for a lifeline. Marcus. He pleaded, Marcus, listen to me. She is vindictive. It was a long time ago. It was a loan. I meant to pay it back. Thorne closed the folder. He took off his glasses. He looked at Gavin with eyes that were completely devoid of friendship. You stole from your own child, Thorne asked quietly. I managed the family assets. Gavin stammered. It was for the greater good. Trent needed the push. She was not going anywhere. She was working in a coffee shop. I spoke then. My voice was not loud, but it cut through his panic like a knife. I was working in a coffee shop because you took the money that was meant for my books. I stepped forward, closing the distance between us until I was standing right in front of him. I wanted him to see me, really see me. You called me uneducated, Dad. You stood on a stage 2 weeks ago and mocked me to 200 people. You said I was worthless. I pointed to the documents on the table. I educated myself. I built a company that audits yours. I bought the building you are standing in. And I did it all without a single dollar from you. I am not uneducated. I said, I am the one who did the math. I turned to the board. My name is Brianna Schneider. I am the CEO of Citrine Chain Audits, and I am done doing business with this management team. I walked back to my chair and sat down. Thorne cleared his throat. He did not look at Gavin. We need a motion. Thorne said to the room, I move to immediately suspend Gavin Schneider as CEO, pending an external investigation. One of the board members said instantly, seconded, another said, and Trent Schneider, Thorne asked, remove him from operations. The first member said, if his position was purchased with stolen funds, he is a liability. All in favor, Thorne asked. 12 hands went up. Gavin stood there, alone at the head of the table. The marker dropped from his hand and rolled across the floor. It was the only sound in the room. He opened his mouth to speak, to shout, to bully, but nothing came out. For the first time in his life, the volume had been turned off. Thorne looked at me. Ms. Schneider, he said, if the board appoints an interim CEO, one who is willing to correct these compliance issues, would Citrine consider a temporary extension of the audit certification to keep the trucks moving? I looked at Gavin, who was now slumped in his chair, a man whose empire had just evaporated. I looked at Thorne. If Gavin Schneider is removed from the building, I said, and if the lease is renegotiated with Iron Creek to include a transparency clause, then yes, Citrine will grant a 60-day extension. Thank you, Thorne said. He turned to security. Please escort Mr. Schneider to his office to collect his personal effects, and then escort him off the premises. Gavin looked at me one last time as the guards approached him. There was no hate in his eyes anymore, just shock. He looked small. I did not smile. I did not wave. I just watched him go. When the doors closed behind him, the tension in the room broke. The lawyer started whispering. The board members started typing on their phones. I packed up my folders. Ms. Schneider, Thorne said as I stood to leave. That was impressive. Ruthless, but impressive. I paused. It wasn't ruthless. Mr. Thorne, I said, it was just an audit. I walked out of the boardroom and into the hallway. I walked past the executive suite where I saw Patricia Crane packing a box for my father. She looked up at me and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. I took the elevator down to the lobby. I walked out the front doors of the Arbor Cold headquarters. The sun had come out, the gray sky had broken, and the light was hitting the pavement. I took a deep breath. The air tasted different. It didn't taste like revenge. Revenge is bitter. This tasted like oxygen. I took out my phone and called Jillian, who had stayed behind to finalize the paperwork. "It is done," she asked. "It is done," I said. "And the scholarship?" she asked. "Set it up," I said. The Catherine and Evelyn Schneider Memorial Scholarship, $200,000 a year, for students who have lost financial support due to family conflict. You are a good woman. Brianna, Jillian said, "I am a free woman." I said. I hung up the phone. I walked to my car. I got in and started the engine. I checked my rearview mirror, the massive glass building reflected in the glass. But it was shrinking as I drove away. My father had spent his life building a monument to his own name. I had spent 12 years building a life that didn't need one. I turned onto the highway, merging into the traffic. Just one more car on the road. But this time, I knew exactly where I was going. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Emma Revenge Stories. I would love to know where you are tuning in from today. Are you listening on your commute, at work, or relaxing at home? Please let me know in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed seeing justice served, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and smash the hype button to help this story reach more people who need to be reminded that the truth always wins in the end.